48 hours ago, we found something quite remarkable.
What'd they find?
There's a structure.
In Antarctica?
And a specimen.
Really?
Touching down.
This is Kate Lloyd's, Columbia Paleontology.
Let me show you why you flew 10,000 miles. We estimate it's been here 100,000 years.
I'm going to take a tissue sample.
Do you really think that's a good idea?
Yes, I do. You, my friends, will all be immortalized as the people who made this discovery.
Did you hear that?
My God.
Somebody was attacked.
But it seems everyone is fine.
Either someone miraculously healed themselves, or someone is not who they say they are.
What was it doing to him?
It's imitating his cells. I think this thing copies its prey and then hides inside it.
What are you saying?
Not all of us are human. Could be any of us. We can't let this thing leave. If it makes it out of here, millions of people could die.
Hi everyone, welcome to Geekfest Rants. My name is Carlos Barone, and we're here with Steve, and we are going to talk a little bit about The Thing.
The 2011 The Thing.
Exactly. It's not the original, The Thing from Another World. It's not John Carpenter's Thing. This is the new Thing. But it is attached, or it is linked to the John Carpenter The Thing. Well, the reason this movie is connected to the Carpenter version is because it's not a remake of it, it's not a reboot, it's a prequel basically. It's structured to be a prequel.
Absolutely.
And the way that it is connected to the Carpenter film is because the beginning of the Carpenter film, this whole thing starts because something happened at another camp having to do with it being overrun or destroyed by something that, as we watch the Carpenter film, turns into some kind of a monster from outer space that is very kind of difficult to pinpoint and figure out what it is because it keeps taking other people's identity up until, you reach the end of the film where there's only two people left. It's, what is it, 10 Little Indians? You have this huge cast, and then by the time you're done, you're left with one or two people.
Right.
Now, in the Carpenter film, we are given this whole backstory that this has already happened somewhere else, and it is brought into their camp and infects their camp, and it runs amok in their camp. And specifically, we're talking about a Norwegian camp, which is how this film is structured. Now, Steve, let's go over a little bit, before we actually describe what happens in this film, let's talk about what is the connection to this Norwegian camp. What is it that they find in the beginning of John Carpenter's The Thing that now has to be recreated and rebuilt for these new filmmakers who are making a prequel, to give us all that background information?
Right. Well, Carpenter's film begins with a helicopter approaching the American camp with a gunman firing a rifle at a dog. And they're chasing the dog, and they land, and the gunman continues firing and actually fires towards the American crew members and is then subsequently killed. So we have this mystery of why are these guys flying here to kill this dog? And what they discover is that there's another base, if you will, a research station, and they make their way to the research station and find some very disturbing things. They find some corpses in various states. They also find a very ominous block of ice that seems to have had something in the middle of it that is no longer there. Mm-hmm. And they also find some organic material outside the base. They can't quite tell what it is. It's the charred remains of something.
Right.
And in addition to that, they find some videotapes. So they bring all of these items back to their base.
Plus, the base itself is completely demolished,
torched,
burned down. It's
Absolutely.
been completely either burned or blown up or something.
Mm-hmm. Something bad definitely happened.
Right,
So-
and there's what would appear to be evidence of some kind of hand-to-hand combat that would have taken place all over the base.
Yes.
A lot of barricades and a lot of torched and burned out areas of the structure.
Mm-hmm. So what would you call them, scientists or
like a research station.
research
we never know exactly
team.
what they're researching. I mean, we talked about this on our commentary.
Mm-hmm.
The American base, we meet all these different characters, and they each have a specialty. Not all of them are scientists. It seems like most of them are support crew for the scientists. So you
Right.
have your cook, your helicopter pilot,
Mm-hmm.
your mechanics, and you have a couple of doctors and actual legitimate scientists. They're not an army base. They're not attached to any military unit, but they're so far out there that I mentioned this before on the commentary. You almost get this vibe of they're almost like prisoners.
Right.
You have this vibe that they're in a place they don't want to be, and they're stuck there for X amount of time, and they just can't wait to finish their tour so they can get the hell out of there. So you have this very, upsetting atmosphere for these people to be in, like a confined submarine or a ship kind of environment.
Right, it kind of reminds me of the Abyss.
Yeah. But this new group that we meet, the Norwegian group, they're a little different. They seem to be more on the scientific side.
Yes, they seem to be looking for something. They are, I believe, led by a geologist. So there's definitely something that they're trying to discover,
Right.
whether it's, trying to strike for oil or what have you. But they stumble upon something.
Right. Now, before we get into the actual order of events of how things take place, let's go back again to the how the link is made between the old and the new. Like you said before, based on this information that we have from the original film, the corpses found, the dog that makes it to the American camp, the torch building, the videotapes, that's where we get the meat of this story. We're told that at some point, this Norwegian group finds something in the ice, out, in the tundra. And whatever it is, they are capable of, I believe, didn't they, on the videotapes, don't they show they set off charges, like dynamite charges or something, to be able to excavate something?
Yes.
And as a result of that, they also find, when they apparently excavate this area, they discover what appears to be a ship. And not necessarily inside the ship, but outside the ship is where they find this block of, well, it's not a block of ice. It's a block of ice because they have to cut it out as a block. But they find something that apparently crawled out of the ship and made it to the ice and basically froze out in the ice. That's all they have to go on as far as the first movie goes, in terms of that's your background information as to where this came from.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, the movie opens with a spaceship kind of heading towards Earth.
The Carpenter film.
And that's supposed to have taken place, I think, millions of years in the past.
No, I think it's probably 100,000 years before 1982.
Okay. So it's not a very current event. It's something that's happened, and it's
Yeah.
now stuck in the ice for a long time. So as far as we know, that's the background. Something happens that we don't get to see, whether it's videotapes or diary entries or anything like that, that ends in this entire crew of Norwegian scientists either dying, being almost like their DNA is deformed, or something happens to their bodies that gets all deformed and burned up, because that's how they recover some of these remains. One guy is found to have committed suicide. He doesn't seem to be affected by any DNA manipulation or anything. And the two that you mentioned before, who seem to be in good shape, chasing a dog in a helicopter. So that's the direct connection we have in terms of, here's your building blocks of this story. So now let's move on to, all right, now that you have those building blocks, let's see how this particular director, who you have the name over there?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to pronounce this. His name is Matthias van Henningen Jr.
Whoa.
A Dutch director.
From what I know, from what we've seen, this is his first big American film, I guess?
Yeah. Actually, this was an outgrowth of another project that he was attached to.
With Zack Snyder.
With Zack Snyder, writing and producing, called Army of the Dead, about zombies in Las Vegas. And that project fell through, I believe, a few months before production was about to begin, and he contacted his agent and said, is there any chance I can get onto this Thing project, because apparently it's one of his favorite films.
Well, the way that they approach this film, again, you have the foundation from the Carpenter film.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he doesn't give us every piece of the puzzle. He gives us a couple of pieces. You have your background, you have a little bit of the aftermath of what happened to this group, and then how it all transfers to the American group. So what they do on this particular film is we start off not with the crashing of the ship like we saw on the Carpenter film, but it's more of a contemporary time, you know, very close to the 1982 timeline, maybe a few months, maybe a month before or a few weeks before, where there's, what do you call it, like one of those snow tractors? Yeah, and they seem to be chasing a signal. They're homing in on a signal, and they get to a point where they feel like they're very close to something, and next thing you know, the whole bottom of the ice that they're standing on collapses, and this vehicle kind of crashes into a ravine, like an underground fissure.
Crevasse.
Right, and it gets kind of stuck there.
Sure.
And when they turn on the lights, you know, before exiting through the back, I guess that's what they would have to do to escape that area. When they turn on the lights, all of a sudden they see down into this pit where the ship appears to be.
Right.
Almost like a cave, like a secondary lower level of a cave where the ship is sitting in. And that's how apparently the discovery is made of something is found in the ice. Now, explain to us, Steve, a little bit of from there is when we jump into the whole, this is not public information, but they're trying to keep it quiet, and how they go about finding a couple of people, you know, experts in the subject matter to help them retrieve something from there.
Right. Well, the lead scientist is a guy, his character's name is Dr. Sander Halvorsen, and his research assistant, character's name is Adam. He recommends this other gal, her name is Kate, she's a paleontologist. Dr. Lloyd, to come with them to Antarctica to, you know, work on a really big project. And she doesn't really know what the project is, but, you know, she's a young, single, adventurous scientist, and she kind of goes along for the ride, just, hey, I got to see what this is all about.
And she's kind of like she's the lead of the film.
Yeah.
She is the person that you're supposed to be seeing the film through her eyes. She's the person that kind of guides you through this film.
Yes.
But there's also a secondary lead, I would say, the character of Carter, who's a helicopter pilot who happens to be an American helicopter pilot working for the Norwegian group.
Right, played by Joel Edgerton.
Well, most recently he was in Warrior. And he also has a, I don't want to call it a cameo, he has
That's a bit role.
Pretty important role in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. He plays
Uncle Owen, a young Uncle Owen.
A very young Uncle Owen, and he looked young back then. I remember when I saw.
Yeah.
Now he's a little older, obviously. It's been maybe 8-9 years since those original films. And he is also the lead character because he plays the other lead American non-Norwegian person. To me, it almost felt like, in a way, they're taking the Kurt Russell character and splitting it into
half.
two.
Absolutely.
You have the, as you mentioned before, the Ripley half, which is the female lead tough, you know, person, and then the male half of that character.
Right.
And they kind of take their turns, you know, in terms of, even though they're kind of split apart for a good portion of the movie,
sure,
they kind of take their turn. So you were saying that they find Dr. Lloyd and convince her to come take a look at something. They don't tell her too much what it is.
No.
But they kind of throw her little bits and pieces here and there.
Right. Well, they take her to where the Thing, the passenger of this spacecraft, is housed in the ice and ask her, can you cut it out? So, of course, she does so, because they take her down into the cave. She sees the ship, and then they go and they find the Thing, the passenger. So they cut it out of the ice, they cart it back to their research lab, And
that's her specialty, is being able to, because that's how we meet her.
Right,
she's
without damaging them.
Right, she's working on whether it's an old elephant or some creature from, I guess, some mammal from God knows what ice age.
Right.
And that's her specialty. She can get these animals out of frozen situations, I guess, and kind of help them defrost them or whatever the hell it is. she does.
without harming the remains.
The remains, right.
So they bring the thing back to the base, and everybody's in a very celebratory mood. They just discovered the first alien.
But they're still keeping it quiet. They don't want to...
No, because they want to take the credit. They want to figure out how are we going to position this. They're not aware of any danger at this moment. They figure the thing is frozen in ice, so, we're fine.
But the lead scientist seems to be operating at a faster speed than everybody else. He seems to be kind of anxious and a little impatient at times at how things are moving. He wants things to go faster.
Right. And in the midst of his anxiety, the character of Dr. Lloyd is, again, more cautious, does not want to rush things, does not want to start drilling into the ice.
She's a little more reluctant about it. I don't know if she mentions anything about contagion or possible, tests that need to be done before you actually take out the whole thing.
Right, exactly. So, there's a certain element of that. And then you have the American helicopter crew, the pilot, Joel Edgerton, and his two co-pilots. They're, again, just kind of in the dark. They don't really know what's happening. They're kind of looking to everyone else for the cues to find out, should we also be distrusting of this discovery or not? So they're kind of riding the fence at that moment.
Right.
And we know that there are plans for them to leave at some point in the near future to go back, and they're starting to tease the fact that some storms are coming or that a big storm is coming.
Right, because they're support crew. They're not really...
Exactly.
They're there to help them move equipment around, basically.
Right, and they're there to, bring supplies back and forth, essentially. So the celebration begins, everybody's singing and drinking and dancing, and, that's when the ice that's encasing the creature starts to melt just a little bit. And one of the Americans, actually the actor who played Mr. Echo on Lost and also played Adebisi on Oz, the HBO show. Right. And again, I'm not going to even try pronouncing his name. He goes in to check it out to see, what's going on with the thing, and puts his hand on it, and the thing explodes. It just...
Right through the ice.
It goes right through the ice, jumps right through the roof, and you get a glimpse of it to see kind of what it looks like and how big it is.
Now, the thing is that this is after they've drilled into it and touched it.
Right.
The fact that I guess a hole was made on the ice, enough for a little tiny piece of it to be attached to the drill bit,
right,
was enough to release this thing.
Yeah, it was enough. And again, it melted enough, so he's actually putting his hand on it and pressing on it, and the ice just completely blows open and the thing escapes. So he runs in, alerts everyone, they start running around. Now, at this moment, one of the other co-pilots had gone out to the chopper to get something. He was looking for, his homemade brew or something like that. He has some sort of alcohol out there, some sort of scotch or what have you, and mass confusion ensues. We don't know where everybody is, so then we really do get a chance to see the creature, which is what I was looking forward to the most, to see it in its original form. Right.
You see all these like hooks, like really weird hook kind of legs, and it grabs people with almost like tentacles and stuff. So you get a couple of quick glimpses at, is it the original form or is it whatever creature it's mimicking from another planet or whatever the hell it is?
But I think they probably used the designs from the Blair monster from Carpenter's version, because if you look at it, it kind of looks like you have this central trunk, and then it has some sort of head that's unrecognizable. And it has these long arms, very muscular arms, and then the tentacles kind of shoot off of that.
Yeah.
So it has amazing jumping abilities and grabbing abilities. So
we're kind of in the middle of the movie now. Once the cat is out of the bag, the creature is loose, and now it's one by one, it's going to start grabbing these people. And part of the fun of this movie is to see how it does mimic these people. In other words, we remember the Carpenter classic kills, if you will.
Right.
And in this film, not only do they have to do them more modern, but they also have to do them in a way where it kind of harbors back to the original film. on the original film, when we saw these cadavers or these bizarre organic leftovers, we start to see a lot of these now. One of the most memorable ones that I'm sure you want to talk about is the one they find where there looks like it's a head attached to a second head and kind of shifted, almost like shifted off to the side.
Well, before we get to that, what's interesting is that the kills in this film are different from the Carpenter film because, again, the Thing is just interacting with humans at this moment.
Now, is this before or after the dog?
The dog gets attacked in the very beginning. The dog is attacked first.
Right.
Because they do find the blood in the kennel where the dog was kept.
Right.
So the dog is definitely assimilated at this point.
Right.
But we don't know if the dog is assimilating people or it's the Thing that popped out.
Right, because in this particular movie, it's a lot harder to keep track of how many things are there at the same time.
Right.
We always feel that it's, especially in the first film, at least at first, that it's moving from one to the other, from this guy to that guy. But in this film, what we don't realize while we're watching is that this thing is spreading in different directions.
Yes.
And you spend a lot of time or you focus on this big kill of, okay, we got it cornered, we're burning it. But wait a minute, there's another one over there and there's another one over here. You don't keep track and you can't keep track of how many are there.
Right.
And the dog is one of the first ones, which is important because the dog is a big important device that will lead us all the way to the end.
Right. So it's still kind of learning how its prey behaves. So the first kill is right out in the open. So it goes after one of the Norwegians first, who is standing next to his buddy. He gets pulled underneath that the building, and you see the whole thing happening. And then they torch the whole building, and then they start doing an autopsy, and they see that he's inside. But then they start figuring out, well, how come he's a little bit different? Like, they actually find a rod. The guy had broken his arm about a year before, and we start to explore the theory of the replication, that it cannot replicate any inorganic material.
Right. And that's a very important thing because that is a way for this film to be able to devise a very important plot point without having to continually replicate the original.
Exactly.
Very important.
Right. And again, we'll get to that in a couple of moments. But what happens is, after that first kill, that first assimilation, the Thing is learning all the time. So the next batch of assimilations or kill scenes happen in more intimate environments. The next one happens in a somewhat public location in that it happens inside the helicopter. You have the 3 Americans and you have one Norwegian who was next to the first guy who got killed,
a little bit.
who was injured. There's something going on with him. He might have internal injuries.
And you're led to believe
that he
might have something weird
going on.
Might
be a copy already. But what winds up happening is the other co-pilot who had gone out earlier to get his hooch actually starts unfolding when he feels that he's threatened and his face breaks open.
Well, because what happened is the
coming
helicopter
back.
is called back.
Right.
The guy doesn't want to go back. The guy who ends up being the creature, he doesn't want to come back to the camp. He wants to be set loose, be brought out to civilization, I guess.
Right.
And when he realizes that they're sending everybody back, he's like, all right, well, forget this.
Right. So then the chopper goes down and we don't know what's...
Right.
We're seeing it then from the perspective of the ground, and we don't know exactly what's happening inside the chopper. It goes down out of sight over a mountain range. And then after that...
Well, there's a pilot, co-pilot, Carter, and wasn't the co-pilot Mr. Echo?
Yes.
Okay. And then there's the 2 passengers in the back, the injured
guy,
guy
one of whom is
and the
Thing.
creature.
Right. So the assumption is they're all dead or
They
what
see
have
it
you.
from far away. They can see the smoke.
Yeah,
They're
they see the
something
smoke.
happened. We don't know what happened.
So then we go back inside, and now we're introducing the concept of the blood or the aftermath of an assimilation, where the main character, Dr. Lloyd, discovers blood inside a shower.
Yeah.
And she's starting to get very suspicious of everyone, and one of the other team members, who happens to be a female, starts talking to her about her suspicions that it's this guy or that guy, and she winds up getting her alone because they're looking for keys. I forget what the key is for, to unlock the keys for all the vehicles or something to that effect. and turns out that she, this other scientist, is actually a copy, and starts splitting open and trying to assimilate Dr. Kate Lloyd.
Really weird,
a very strange, creepy...
the folding and bending of the body, and it's really disturbing.
The collarbone basically splits open, and it starts showing itself. But again, by now, this is the third assimilation. So the thing is understanding that it needs to do this in a very quiet spot where it's alone so that no one suspects that it has already copied one of the team members, so that it can continue copying them until it overtakes the entire team. So our main character manages to escape somehow by the skin of her teeth, and then that version of the thing gets torched.
Because this is the main character, we're kind of expecting this main character to survive quite a long way, because this is the person telling us the story. They're not disposing of main likable characters right away, at least.
True.
So this person has a free pass, if you will, from a story writing perspective.
Right. And then, again, throughout this whole process, you have this lead Norwegian scientist who's kind of seemingly funding the project, who is still, he's like the Burke, from Aliens. He's more interested about the payday, about corporate, about, we got to get this thing back to the real world so that I can make all this money.
And he doesn't seem convinced.
And he doesn't seem convinced that
he's not
something
very
is
worried
wrong.
about the fact that people are dropping dead left and right.
Right. Even when he's witnessing some of these assimilations.
Which makes us believe that,
maybe
he's already infected. That's why he doesn't give a
copy.
crap about anything.
Exactly. So, in addition to the blood in the shower, which again, our main character goes back into that bathroom, the shower has been cleaned up. So, obviously, there's a copy in their midst and understands that somebody suspects that when you see that blood, that doing my mojo with them. So the blood has been cleaned up, but she finds something on the floor of the bathroom. She finds fillings from someone's teeth.
Right.
And starts to put two and two together, because she is a scientist, to say, well, why are these fillings here? They're metal fillings. That metal rod that we found inside of that creature earlier.
Well, before that, don't they first speculate that if they can perform a test, that they should maybe examine everybody's blood to make sure the blood is pure, or they can examine the blood and say, okay, this blood is not pure, this blood is pure, which brings us back to the original film. It's like saying, hey, let's do the similar test to the original film, and if they would have done that, it would have been a copy of the original idea, which would have been bad.
Well, and they did establish it already, because when they take that piece out with the drill of the original thing, she puts it under the microscope and looks at it, and you see what happens. You have the alien cells replicating the human cells, and the research assistant, Adam, she shows it to him as well. And she's trying to tell people what's happening, but they're really not listening to her. So that had already happened at this point. So, yes, they formulate this test, and what happens?
They need everybody's blood samples or something, and isn't there an explosion in the area where the blood is, so all the blood is useless to them?
Right.
All the equipment they need, it gets destroyed.
Which, again, was very similar to destroying the blood samples in the Carpenter version. But then they do start going down a different path,
which is
in that
good,
they're talking about the inorganic material, that it cannot assimilate that.
Right, because if they would have done the blood thing again, to me it would have felt like a cheat. It's like, come on.
No, it would have been totally lame.
Don't copy it. And this new test that they determined, I like it. It's a very smart, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't contradict anything of the Carpenter movie.
No.
It's just something that they never touched upon because they didn't need to.
Right. And then the trick of it is that, well, who's to say that everybody has fillings in their teeth? Which we go through, again,
and
a lineup.
That happens.
Some people don't have fillings, or one of the characters has porcelain. So they're not able to tell if he is or isn't assimilated. So we have two separate sections and two separate groups of people. And now they're trying to figure out a way, all right, well, how do we address this? And then, lo and behold, here come some survivors from the helicopter crash. It's our two Americans,
the pilot and the co-pilot, Carter
and the co-pilot, Mr. Echo. And of course, everybody suspects that they have been copied.
Well, they already say, how could they have survived? Like, I guess the whole night.
Right.
walking back from God knows how far.
Right, unless they're aliens.
Right.
So they get segregated, locked up in a cabin.
Which is a little reminiscent of the Carpenter
Of the
film.
Blair cabin.
When they lock him up.
Right. I'm feeling much better now.
I can come out now. I'm good now.
It's not It ain't Fuchs. So, again, little nods to the Carpenter film along the way, or without besmirching the story that they're trying to tell, because it had to be very specific to dovetail with what had been established already. So then again, we're now faced with, okay, I have no way of telling if you guys are the thing, so what are we going to do about this? And then all hell breaks loose again, because we go back to try to do the test on the two Americans, and we discover that they've dug out, again, very reminiscent of Blair, digging underneath the cabin to get out.
Right.
Except he was going to build a little miniature spaceship, but didn't really have all the parts, I guess.
Well, this brings us to the end of part 1 of our Deconstructing the Thing special. Please join us again next week when we will continue this two-parter, and we will get to some of the juiciest parts of the film. On behalf of Steve and myself, thanks for joining us here at Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye.
Is it true what you found?
It's true.
That's not possible. It's not dead.
It attacks its prey and then hides inside it. Could be any of us.
Stop.